Luna was in active labor when she found 5 kittens screaming in barbed wire, their small bodies bleeding into the storm-soaked mud. What she did next would risk everything she had and defy the cruelest laws of the wild. Before we continue, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like the video, and comment where in the world you're watching from. Let's go. The storm rolled across the prairie like a living thing, its dark clouds churning with barely contained fury as lightning split the sky in jagged white lines. Rain fell in sheets so thick it turned the world gray, transforming the rural landscape of eastern Colorado into a blur of mud and water. The old ranch road that cut through the grasslands had become a river of brown sludge, and the barbed wire fences that divided the properties trembled under the assault of wind that howled like something wounded and wild. It was the kind of storm that sent sensible creatures running for shelter, the kind that reminded humans just how small they were against nature's raw power. But not all creatures had shelter to run to, and not all storms brought only destruction. Sometimes, in the chaos of wind and rain, fate arranged meetings that defied all logic and expectation. Luna moved through the storm with the careful deliberation of a predator who understood that survival meant respecting danger. The bobcat was heavily pregnant, her spotted coat darkened by rain that plastered her fur against her swollen sides. At 7 years old, she was in her prime, an experienced hunter who had successfully raised 2 previous litters in these grasslands. Her territory covered nearly 12 square miles of prairie and scrubland, a domain she knew intimately. Every rabbit warren, every prairie dog town, every sheltered den and hunting ground existed as clearly in her mind as a map. But the storm had driven her from her carefully prepared birthing den in a rocky outcrop 2 miles north. Water had begun seeping through the entrance, and her instincts screamed that her kittens, due within days, would drown if she stayed. So she had ventured out into the tempest, searching for higher ground and a dry sanctuary where she could bring her babies into the world safely. The wind battered her as she crossed the open grassland, each gust threatening to knock her sideways. Luna's golden eyes, usually so sharp and focused, squinted against the rain as she navigated by memory and instinct. Thunder cracked overhead, so loud it seemed to shake the very ground beneath her paws. She had faced storms before, had weathered blizzards and droughts, floods and fires. This was simply another challenge in a life filled with them. Her powerful legs carried her steadily forward, muscles rippling beneath her wet fur as she made her way toward a series of abandoned farm buildings she knew stood near the old fence line. The structures were falling apart, but they would provide shelter until the storm passed and she could find or dig a more permanent den. As Luna approached the fence that marked the boundary between open prairie and what had once been cultivated farmland, her ears suddenly swiveled forward. Even through the roar of wind and thunder, she had caught something, a sound that didn't belong to the storm. High-pitched and desperate, it cut through the chaos with the unmistakable note of young life in distress. Luna paused, her head tilting as she tried to pinpoint the source. Her maternal instincts, already heightened by her advanced pregnancy, flared with unexpected intensity. The sound came again. Multiple voices now, tiny and terrified, crying out for help that seemed impossible to find in the storm's fury. Every survival instinct Luna possessed told her to keep moving, to find shelter, to protect herself and the unborn kittens that shifted restlessly in her belly. But that sound, those cries of helpless young, triggered something deeper than mere instinct. She turned toward the fence line, her paws sinking into mud with each step. As she drew closer, the scene that emerged from the gray veil of rain made her freeze in her tracks. There, tangled in the cruel embrace of barbed wire that had been bent and twisted by the storm, were 5 tiny kittens. They were not bobcat kittens. Luna could see that immediately. These were domestic cats, probably no more than 6 weeks old, their small bodies desperately clinging to the wire that held them prisoner. Two were orange tabbies, their striped coats matted with rain and what appeared to be blood. Two were brown tabbies, their tiny paws wrapped around the wire as they tried in vain to pull themselves free. The fifth was lighter, with patches of white visible through the mud and wet fur that covered its shaking form. The kittens were dying. Luna could see it in the way they moved, their strength fading with each passing moment. The barbed wire had cut into their delicate skin in multiple places, small streaks of red mixing with the rainwater that ran down their bodies. They were hypothermic, their cries growing weaker as the cold stole their remaining warmth. How they had gotten into this position was a mystery. Perhaps blown against the fence by the violent wind, perhaps chased by a predator and forced into the wire in their panic. It didn't matter how they had arrived at this moment of crisis. What mattered was that they were here, trapped and bleeding, with death closing in on them with every second that passed. Luna should have walked away. These were not her young, not even her species. They were domestic cats descended from house pets, creatures that had no place in the wild land she called home. In the harsh mathematics of nature, their survival or death meant nothing to her own chances, to her own kitten's futures. And yet she found herself moving closer, her nose twitching as she caught their scent beneath the smell of rain and blood. They smelled of milk and warmth, of the innocence that all young creatures carried. They smelled like kittens, and every fiber of her maternal being responded to that fundamental truth. The rain showed no signs of letting up as Luna circled the fence cautiously, her experienced eyes assessing the situation from every angle. The barbed wire was old, its metal rusted and weakened by years of exposure to the elements, but it remained wickedly sharp. Each barb was a potential threat, capable of tearing through her own flesh, just as easily as it had pierced the kitten's delicate skin. The wire had been twisted by the storm, creating a tangled mess that held the tiny cats in what amounted to a death trap. The lowest strand had been pushed down almost to ground level by a fallen branch, and it appeared the kittens had tried to crawl under it only to become snagged on the barbs above. Their panicked struggles had only made things worse, wrapping them more tightly in the cruel embrace of metal and thorns. Luna's keen mind, honed by years of survival in an unforgiving landscape, worked through the problem with surprising clarity. She could see that the kittens were hooked by their skin and fur in multiple places, some caught by single legs, others tangled more completely. The orange tabby on the far left seemed the most severely trapped, with wire wrapped around both its front legs and something catching its neck area. That one's cries had grown noticeably weaker in just the few minutes Luna had been observing. Time was running out, not just because of the injuries, but because the cold was stealing their body heat at an alarming rate. Even if they were somehow freed from the wire, they would need warmth immediately, or they would die from hypothermia within the hour. A particularly violent gust of wind nearly knocked Luna sideways, reminding her of her own vulnerable position. Her unborn kittens shifted inside her, and she felt a sharp twinge in her abdomen that might have been an early contraction. Her body was telling her that she needed shelter, needed to prepare for the birth that could come at any moment. The abandoned farm buildings were only a few hundred yards away, dry and safe. Every logical part of her brain screamed at her to abandon these domestic kittens to their fate and save herself and her own young. Nature was not kind to the weak, and these tiny creatures had already proven they lacked the survival skills necessary for life in the wild. Their presence here, trapped and helpless, was evidence of that fundamental failure. But Luna did not move toward the buildings. Instead, she moved closer to the fence, her nose nearly touching the wire as she examined the way the kittens were caught. The closest one, a brown tabby with distinctive stripes and white paws, looked up at her with eyes that reflected pure terror. It froze completely, its small body going rigid as it faced what must have seemed like certain death. Here was a predator, wild and powerful, approaching while it hung helpless and injured. The kitten's survival instincts told it to run, but there was nowhere to go, no escape possible. It simply stared at Luna with those wide, frightened eyes and waited for the end. Luna lowered her head and did something that would have seemed impossible to any observer. She began to gently lick the kitten's wet fur, her rough tongue working with surprising delicacy. The gesture was one of comfort, the same motion she would use to soothe her own young. The brown tabby kitten remained frozen for a moment. Then something shifted in its tiny brain. The warmth of Luna's tongue, the gentleness of her touch, triggered recognition that transcended species. This was not a predator preparing to kill. This was something else entirely, something the kitten's young mind could only interpret as mother. The tension in its small body eased fractionally, and it made a different sound. Not a cry of terror, but a soft chirp of response. Luna pulled back and began to examine the wire more carefully, using her nose and whiskers to understand the configuration of the trap. She could see that the branch holding down the lower wire was the key to everything. If she could move it, could shift it just enough, the tension on the upper wires might ease and create enough slack for the kittens to slip free. It would require strength and precision, and there was significant danger that she might become entangled herself. But her mind was made up by instincts older than reason, by the fundamental drive that told her young creatures in distress must be helped regardless of species or circumstance. She positioned herself carefully, mindful of her swollen belly, and got her teeth around the branch where it pressed against the lower wire. The wood was slippery with rain, and her first attempt to move it failed completely. Luna readjusted her grip, her powerful jaw muscles flexing as she bit down harder. This time when she pulled, the branch shifted slightly, maybe an inch, but it was movement. The kittens sensed something was happening and their cries intensified, hope and fear mixing in their weak voices. Luna repositioned again, her back paws digging into the mud for leverage as she pulled with all her considerable strength. The branch moved more substantially this time, sliding several inches across the muddy ground. As it did, Luna felt and heard the twang of wire under tension suddenly finding slack. The upper strand sagged noticeably, and the kitten closest to her, that brown tabby with white paws, suddenly found it could move its caught leg more freely. But they were not free yet, not nearly. Luna would need to move the branch further, and she would need to be careful that she didn't cause the wire to snap back and injure the kittens more severely. She paused to catch her breath, rain streaming down her face, and assessed what she had accomplished and what still needed to be done. Lightning illuminated the prairie in stark white brilliance, and in that frozen moment, Luna saw the full scope of what she was attempting. 5 tiny lives hung in the balance. Their survival depended entirely on her actions in the next few minutes. The thunder that followed was so loud it seemed to come from inside her own chest, reverberating through her bones. One of the kittens, the lighter-colored one with white patches, let out a terrified wail at the sound, its small body convulsing with fear. Luna felt another contraction ripple through her abdomen, stronger this time, unmistakable. Her own kittens were coming soon, perhaps within hours. She needed to find shelter immediately, needed to prepare, needed to focus on her own survival and that of her unborn young. Instead, she bent to the branch again and pulled with everything she had. Her muscles strained against the weight and the suction of mud that seemed determined to hold it in place. She pulled until her vision blurred, until her jaw ached from the pressure, until she felt something might tear inside her. The branch suddenly gave way, sliding a full foot across the saturated ground. The wire configuration changed dramatically as tension released from multiple points at once. The brown tabby with white paws practically fell forward as the wire that had been holding its legs suddenly went slack. It tumbled into the mud but immediately scrambled to its feet, free of the barbed wire for the first time in what must have felt like an eternity to its young mind. But the kitten did not run. Luna would have expected it to flee, to put as much distance as possible between itself and this place of pain and terror. Instead, the small cat moved closer to Luna, its instincts telling it that safety lay with this large, spotted creature who had freed it. It pressed against Luna's front leg, shivering violently, its tiny body seeking the warmth and protection that only an adult could provide. Luna looked down at it briefly, then returned her attention to the other 4 kittens still caught in the wire. Unfreed, 4 remaining, and each would require careful work to extract without causing more injury. The second brown tabby was caught by its back leg and what appeared to be its tail. Luna approached it carefully, using her nose to push aside the strands of wire that weren't actually holding it. The kitten watched her with wide eyes, its body trembling from cold and shock. But it seemed to understand that she was trying to help. It held still as Luna used her teeth to grip the wire near where it caught the kitten's leg. She pulled gently, trying to bend the wire enough to create an opening. The metal was stronger than she had anticipated, resistant to her efforts. She adjusted her approach, instead using her paw to push down on the wire below the caught leg while simultaneously encouraging the kitten to pull upward with a gentle nudge of her nose. The kitten seemed to understand what was needed. It pulled its leg with surprising strength for something so small, and combined with Luna's pressure on the wire, it suddenly came free. The barb had torn a small cut in the kitten's leg, and blood mixed with rainwater as it fell into the mud next to its sibling. Like the first, this one did not run. It too pressed against Luna, seeking shelter from the storm and comfort from the trauma it had endured. 2 freed, 3 remaining, and Luna's contractions were coming more frequently now. She could feel her body preparing for birth, hormones flooding her system that should have sent her racing for a den. But she wouldn't stop until all 5 were free. The 2 orange tabbies were next, and they presented a more complex challenge. They were tangled together, their struggles having wound the wire around them in a way that made it difficult to see where one kitten ended and the other began. Luna approached the orange tabbies with growing concern. These 2 had been fighting the wire the longest and hardest, their panicked movements creating a knot of fur, blood, and metal that would require patience and precision to untangle. The first orange tabby, slightly larger than its sibling, had wire caught around both front legs and something near its throat that made Luna's heart race with worry. If the wire was putting pressure on the kitten's windpipe, time was even more critical than she had thought. The second orange tabby was smaller, more delicate, and it had gone ominously quiet. Its eyes were open but glazed, and its breathing came in shallow, rapid pants that spoke of severe shock and hypothermia. Luna began with the larger orange tabby, the one whose position seemed most immediately life-threatening. She used her nose to trace the path of the wire, understanding that she needed to work methodically from one end to the other, rather than trying to free everything at once. The wire around the kitten's neck was her primary concern. She could see now that it wasn't actually tight against the throat, but had snagged on the loose skin at the scruff of the neck, the same place a mother cat would grip to carry her young. This was fortunate, as it meant the kitten could still breathe freely, but the barbs had penetrated deep enough to cause bleeding that mixed with the rain in dark rivulets. Working with a delicacy that seemed impossible for an animal with paws designed for hunting and killing, Luna used her teeth to grip the wire just above where it caught the scruff. She pulled slowly, steadily, trying to bend the metal enough to slip the barb free from the kitten's skin. The orange tabby cried out in pain as the barb pulled against its flesh, but Luna didn't stop. Quick would be better than gentle here. With a final tug, the barb came free, leaving a small puncture wound but releasing the kitten's neck from the wire's grip. The orange tabby immediately tried to move, but its front legs were still caught, and it only succeeded in pulling against the wire and causing itself more pain. Luna moved to the front legs next, which were tangled in a way that had twisted the kitten's body at an awkward angle. She could see that one leg was caught above what would be the elbow in a human, while the other was snagged near the paw. The wire connecting these 2 points had wound around itself, creating a loop that tightened each time the kitten struggled. Luna knew she needed to unwrap this carefully, needed to reverse the process of entanglement rather than trying to force the kitten free. She used her paw to push down on the lowest strand of wire, creating slack in the upper loop. Then, using her teeth with surprising gentleness, she began to guide the kitten's caught paw backward through the loop, essentially unthreading it from the wire. It took several attempts, with the kitten alternating between helping and hindering her efforts, but finally the paw came free. With that accomplished, the upper leg was easier. Luna simply bent the wire down far enough for the kitten to pull its leg over and out. The orange tabby stumbled forward, weak and bleeding from multiple cuts, but free. It collapsed into the mud next to the two brown tabbies, its small chest heaving with exhaustion and relief. 3 freed, 2 remaining, and Luna felt a contraction so strong it nearly buckled her legs. She steadied herself, breathing through the pain, knowing that her own kittens would not wait much longer. The smaller orange tabby was in the worst condition of all 5 kittens. Luna could see that immediately as she turned her attention to it. This one had gone silent, not from acceptance, but from the edge of consciousness. Its body temperature had dropped dangerously low, and the shock of its injuries and the prolonged exposure to the freezing rain had pushed it to the brink of death. The wire held it in an almost sitting position, caught at the hindquarters and across one shoulder. But more concerning than the wire was the kitten's complete lack of response when Luna touched it. The small body was limp, unresisting, the fight gone completely from its tiny frame. Luna worked faster now, her movements less cautious as she recognized that gentleness meant nothing if the kitten died while she was trying to free it. She used her powerful jaws to simply bite through the wire at a point where it had already been weakened by rust and weather. The metal parted with a snap that sent the free end whipping through the air. The kitten fell forward, released from the wire but making no attempt to catch itself. Luna caught the small body gently in her mouth by the scruff, the way she would carry her own kittens, and placed it carefully in the mud. The orange tabby didn't move, didn't make a sound, just lay there like a small wet rag in the rain. Luna lowered her head to the unconscious orange kitten and began licking it vigorously, her rough tongue working across its small body with increasing urgency. She was trying to stimulate circulation, trying to warm it, trying to call it back from whatever dark place it had retreated to. The kitten remained motionless for long seconds that felt like hours, and Luna began to fear she had freed it from the wire only to lose it to the cold. Then finally, a tiny shudder ran through the small body. It wasn't much, barely more than a twitch, but it was life asserting itself against death's pull. The kitten's mouth opened slightly and a weak sound emerged, more gasp than meow, but it was enough. Luna continued her ministrations, warming and stimulating until the kitten's breathing became slightly more regular, but there was still one more trapped in the wire. The lighter-colored kitten with white patches had been crying throughout the entire rescue, its voice growing more desperate as it watched its siblings freed one by one while it remained caught. This one was tangled primarily by one back leg and its tail, with wire also snagged in the longer fur of its belly. It was shivering so violently that Luna could see its whole body shaking even through the rain. Unlike the unconscious orange tabby, this kitten was still very much aware and very much terrified. It watched Luna's approach with eyes that showed both hope and fear, understanding that this large predator was its only chance for survival, but unable to completely override the instinct that told it wild cats were dangerous. Luna moved to it quickly now, her own contractions coming in waves that made her movements jerky and less controlled than she would have liked. She could feel her body opening, preparing for birth, feel the first of her own kittens beginning to move into position. She had perhaps 30 minutes, maybe less, before the birth would begin, whether she was ready or not. The lighter-colored kitten cried out as Luna gripped the wire near its caught leg, but she didn't have time for excessive gentleness anymore. She bent the wire with brute force, using strength rather than finesse, and the kitten's leg pulled free with a sharp cry of pain. The tail was next, and Luna simply bit through the wire that held it, ignoring the proper technique she had used with the others. The belly fur presented the final challenge. The longer hair had wound around a barb in a way that created a knot that wouldn't simply pull free. Luna made a decision that would have been unthinkable earlier in the rescue. She carefully bit through the matted fur itself, severing it near the skin and leaving the wire still tangled in the cut hair, but freeing the kitten's body. The lighter-colored kitten fell forward as the last connection was broken, crying out in relief and pain as it joined its 4 siblings in the mud. All 5 were free. All 5 were alive, though the smaller orange tabby remained barely conscious and all of them were hypothermic and injured. Luna looked at the 5 tiny cats huddled in the mud, shaking and bleeding, dependent entirely on her for their continued survival. Every maternal instinct she possessed screamed at her to gather them, to take them to shelter, to warm them and care for them as she would her own young. But another contraction hit her, stronger than any before, and she knew with absolute certainty that her own kittens were coming now. Not in 30 minutes, not in an hour, but now. She felt the unmistakable pressure, felt her body beginning the process that could not be stopped or delayed. The abandoned farm buildings were only a few hundred yards away, but in Luna's current condition, that distance might as well have been miles. She looked at the 5 kittens huddled together in the mud, their small bodies pressed against each other in an attempt to share what little warmth they had left. The smaller orange tabby had regained minimal consciousness, but remained dangerously weak, its eyes half closed and its breathing shallow. The other 4 were more alert, but all showed signs of severe hypothermia, their shivering so intense it made their tiny bodies vibrate. Luna knew that if she left them here to seek shelter for herself, they would all be dead within an hour. The cold and their injuries would claim them as surely as the barbed wire would have. Another contraction rippled through her body, this one lasting nearly 30 seconds and forcing Luna to lower herself to the ground until it passed. When it released its grip, she struggled back to her feet, her legs trembling from the effort and the pain. She had perhaps minutes before the birth began in earnest, before her body would take over completely and force her to focus entirely on bringing her own kittens into the world. In those precious minutes, she had to make a choice that would determine not just her fate, but the fate of these 5 small lives she had worked so hard to save. Luna made her decision with the same certainty she had shown when she first approached the barbed wire fence. She would not leave them. She could not leave them. Not after everything she had done. Not after risking her own life and that of her unborn kittens to free them from the wire. She moved to the nearest kitten, the brown tabby with white paws that had been the first one freed, and gently grasped it by the scruff of its neck. The kitten went limp immediately, an instinctive response that all young cats shared, making it easier to be carried by their mother. Luna lifted the small body and began moving toward the farm buildings, her gait awkward as she compensated for her swollen belly and the increasingly frequent contractions. The rain continued its relentless assault as Luna made her way across the muddy ground, each step requiring concentration and effort. The brown tabby kitten hung quietly from her mouth, trusting completely in this strange spotted mother who had saved it. Luna could feel another contraction building, but she pushed through it, forcing her legs to keep moving even as her body screamed at her to stop, to lie down, to prepare for birth. She reached the nearest building, an old barn with half its roof missing and walls that leaned at precarious angles. It wasn't ideal, but the section with intact roofing would provide shelter from the rain, and that was all that mattered right now. Luna entered the barn and quickly surveyed the interior in the dim light that filtered through gaps in the walls. There, in the far corner, she found what she was looking for. A pile of old hay, damp around the edges but dry in the center where the roof had protected it. She placed the brown tabby kitten gently in the hay, then immediately turned and headed back out into the storm. 4 more kittens waited, and her time was running out faster than she had anticipated. The contraction that hit her as she exited the barn nearly brought her to her knees, and she had to pause, panting, until it passed. She made it back to the fence line where the other 4 kittens huddled together, their small voices crying out in distress as they saw her approach. Luna picked up the second brown tabby, the one caught by its back leg and tail, and made the return journey to the barn. This trip was harder, her body fighting her with every step, demanding that she stop and attend to the birth that was now imminent. But Luna pushed through the pain and exhaustion, driven by instincts deeper than self-preservation. She placed the second kitten next to the first, noting with satisfaction that they immediately pressed together, sharing warmth. The third trip was for the larger orange tabby, the one that had been caught by its neck and front legs. Luna's legs shook as she carried the larger orange tabby back through the storm. This kitten was slightly heavier than the brown tabbies, and the extra weight combined with Luna's increasingly difficult contractions made every step a test of will. Halfway to the barn, she had to stop completely as a contraction seized her body with such intensity that she involuntarily dropped the kitten. It fell into the mud with a small cry of alarm, but Luna couldn't even acknowledge the sound until the contraction passed. When she could move again, she picked up the muddy kitten and continued forward, her vision beginning to blur from the strain and pain. She placed the third kitten with its siblings and stood for a moment in the relative shelter of the barn, her sides heaving as she tried to catch her breath. 2 more remained. The lighter-colored kitten with white patches and the smaller orange tabby that had nearly died at the fence. Luna knew that her body was telling her the time for choices had passed. Her first kitten was coming, positioning itself for birth, and her body was preparing to expel it whether she was ready or not. She should stay here, should prepare herself for the birth, should focus on her own babies that needed her now. But the image of those 2 small forms still huddled at the fence, waiting for her to return, drove her back out into the rain. The 4th trip was a nightmare of pain and determination. Luna picked up the lighter-colored kitten, the one that had been freed last, and began what she knew might be her final journey. The contractions were coming continuously now, barely giving her time to recover between them. She had to stop 4 times during the short distance, each time lowering herself and the kitten to the ground as her body convulsed with the effort of labor. The lighter kitten cried softly, frightened by the strange jerking movements, but Luna couldn't comfort it. She could barely function, operating now on pure maternal instinct that overrode every signal her body was sending her to stop. She stumbled into the barn and placed the 4th kitten with the others, then immediately turned to head back out. But this time her legs gave out completely and she collapsed in the hay. A massive contraction seized her entire body, lasting over a minute, and Luna felt something shift inside her. Her first kitten was coming now, right now, and there was nothing she could do to stop it. She panted heavily, her body preparing for the final push that would bring her baby into the world. But in her mind's eye, she could see the smallest orange tabby still lying in the mud by the fence, the one that had barely been conscious when she freed it. That kitten would die alone if she didn't go back for it. Luna forced herself to her feet with a strength she didn't know she possessed. She took 1 step toward the barn entrance, then another, her body screaming in protest as another contraction hit. She pushed through it, pushed through the pain that felt like it might split her in 2, pushed through exhaustion that made her legs feel like they were made of water. She made it outside and oriented herself toward the fence, toward that final kitten that needed her. The storm seemed to have intensified, or perhaps it just felt that way because Luna's senses were overwhelmed by the signals of impending birth. The wind pushed against her, as if trying to force her back to the barn, back to safety, back to the sensible choice of caring for her own young. Luna ignored the wind and the rain and the lightning that split the sky. She ignored the contractions that came one after another in waves of agony. She ignored every instinct that told her she was risking everything, risking her own life and the lives of her unborn kittens for a creature that wasn't even her own species. She walked forward through the storm, one painful step at a time, until she reached the fence line where the smallest orange tabby lay motionless in the mud. For a terrible moment, Luna thought she was too late, thought the kitten had died while she was transporting the others. But as she lowered her head, she felt the tiny body's faint warmth, saw the shallow rise and fall of its small chest. Luna picked up the smallest orange tabby with infinite gentleness, acutely aware of how fragile this little life was in her jaws. The kitten made no sound, didn't even open its eyes, but Luna could feel the flutter of its heartbeat through the thin skin at its scruff. She turned toward the barn and began what would be the most difficult journey of her life. The distance seemed impossible now, stretched into an endless expanse by the pain that consumed her body. Every muscle trembled with exhaustion, every nerve screamed for relief, and her body demanded with primal urgency that she stop and give birth immediately. But Luna walked, one paw forward, then another, moving through the mud and rain with mechanical determination. She fell twice, going down on her front legs as contractions overwhelmed her ability to stand, but each time she protected the kitten in her mouth, keeping it clear of the ground even as her own body pressed into the mud. The second time she fell, she remained down for nearly 2 minutes, unable to rise as her body convulsed with the effort of labor. When the contraction finally released enough for her to move, she stood on shaking legs and continued forward. The barn entrance appeared through the gray sheets of rain like a beacon of hope. Luna's vision had narrowed to a tunnel, everything peripheral falling away until all she could see was that dark opening that represented safety and shelter. She forced her legs to keep moving, counting steps in some dim part of her consciousness that still functioned. 10 steps, 20 steps, 30 steps, each one an individual victory against the overwhelming urge to simply collapse where she stood and let nature take its course. She reached the entrance and stumbled inside, her legs finally giving out completely as she crossed the threshold. Luna fell into the hay next to the 4 kittens she had already rescued, the smallest orange tabby still held carefully in her mouth. She placed it gently with its siblings, then lay on her side as the most powerful contraction, yet seized her entire body. This was it. The final moment that could not be delayed or denied any longer. Luna's body arched and strained, and with a low sound that was part growl and part moan of effort, she pushed. The first of her own kittens emerged in a rush of fluid, sliding onto the hay and the protective sack that all newborns carried into the world. Luna's instincts took over immediately, overwhelming even the pain and exhaustion. She turned and began cleaning her newborn kitten, her rough tongue breaking open the birth sac and stimulating the tiny body to take its first breath. The kitten was perfect, a miniature copy of Luna herself with the distinctive spotted coat and tufted ears of its Bobcat heritage. It made a small sound as air filled its lungs for the first time, a tiny cry that spoke of life and strength. Luna continued cleaning, licking away the birth fluids and drying the wet fur, all while another contraction built inside her, signaling that a second kitten was ready to be born. The domestic kittens, even in their weakened state, seemed to sense the importance of what was happening. They watched with wide eyes as Luna gave birth to her second kitten, then her third. Each one received the same careful attention, the same cleaning and stimulation, the same gentle nudging toward Luna's belly where they could nurse and find warmth. By the time the 4th and final Bobcat kitten was born, the storm outside had begun to lessen. The thunder grew more distant, the rain falling with less intensity, as if nature itself was acknowledging that something miraculous had occurred in this abandoned barn. Luna lay in the hay, exhausted beyond measure, her 4 newborn Bobcat kittens nursing at her belly with the fierce determination of brand new life. But arranged around her, pressing close to her body for warmth and comfort, were the 5 domestic kittens she had rescued. They had moved closer during the birth, drawn by the heat radiating from Luna's body and by some instinct that told them safety lay with this strange spotted mother. The smallest orange tabby, the one that had nearly died, had positioned itself closest to Luna's side, its small body tucked against her spotted fur, as if it belonged there. The first 24 hours in the barn were a delicate balance of survival and acceptance. Luna, exhausted from the rescue and birth, had to divide her attention and energy among 9 kittens instead of the 4 she had expected. Her maternal instincts, already heightened by the rescue, seemed to expand to encompass all the small lives depending on her. She allowed the domestic kittens to share her warmth, positioning them around her body in a way that kept them close to her natural heat, while ensuring her own Bobcat kittens had priority access to nursing. It was an arrangement born of necessity that became something more profound as the hours passed. The domestic kittens, despite their injuries and trauma, showed remarkable resilience. As they warmed up against Luna's body, their shivering gradually subsided and their breathing became stronger and more regular. Even the smallest orange tabby, the one that had been so close to death, began to show signs of recovery. Its eyes opened more fully, focusing on Luna's face with an expression that seemed to convey both gratitude and devotion. The cuts and punctures from the barbed wire had stopped bleeding, and while they would need proper care to avoid infection, the immediate crisis had passed. Luna's Bobcat kittens, newborn and vulnerable, remained mostly unaware of their unusual siblings. They nursed and slept in the instinctive cycle of all newborns, their tiny paws kneading against Luna's belly as they fed. But the domestic kittens watched them with curiosity, and something remarkable began to happen. The older kittens, just weeks ahead in development, seemed to recognize the Bobcat babies as family. They helped keep them warm when Luna needed to shift position. They cleaned them with small licks that mimicked Luna's grooming, and they positioned themselves as a protective barrier between the newborns and the outside world. By the second day, the storm had completely passed, leaving behind a world washed clean and bright with sunshine that streamed through the gaps in the barn walls. Luna knew she needed to venture out to hunt, to replenish her strength and ensure she could continue producing milk for her nursing kittens, but leaving 9 kittens unattended, even for a short time, presented challenges she had never faced before. The solution came naturally as she watched the domestic kittens interact with her newborns. The brown tabby with white paws, the first one she had freed from the wire, seemed to have appointed itself as a guardian. When Luna rose to stretch and assess the area outside the barn, this kitten immediately moved to lie across the sleeping Bobcat babies, providing warmth and protection in Luna's absence. Luna's hunting trip was brief and successful. The storm had driven small prey into exposed positions, and she caught 2 rabbits within an hour. She ate one immediately, needing the nutrition desperately, and brought the second back to the barn. The domestic kittens were too young to eat solid food, but Luna's instinct to provide for her expanded family was strong. She would save it for later when she needed sustenance again. When she returned to the barn, she found all 9 kittens exactly as she had left them, the domestic ones arranged protectively around the sleeping Bobcat babies in a pile of mixed fur patterns and colors that would have seemed impossible just days before. As the days turned into a week, a routine established itself in the abandoned barn. Luna hunted in the early morning and late evening, times when prey was most active and the temperature was mild enough that the kittens could maintain their body heat without her constant presence. The domestic kittens grew stronger each day, their injuries healing remarkably well considering the severity of the trauma they had endured. The discovery came on the 8th day after the rescue, when a local rancher named Tom Martinez drove his truck along the old fence line to inspect storm damage. He had been checking his property systematically since the weather cleared, looking for downed fences and fallen trees that might allow his cattle to wander. When he reached the section where the barbed wire had been twisted and torn by the storm, he noticed something unusual. There were tracks in the mud, lots of them, and what appeared to be blood dried on the wire. Tom was an experienced outdoorsman who had lived on this land for 40 years, and he recognized immediately that something significant had happened here. He followed the disturbed ground toward the old barn, his curiosity piqued by the pattern of tracks that seemed to tell a story of multiple trips back and forth. As he approached the barn entrance, he heard sounds that made him stop in his tracks. Soft mewing, the unmistakable sound of kittens, but there was something else too. A low warning growl that spoke of protective instinct and maternal vigilance. Tom peered carefully around the doorway, his eyes taking a moment to adjust to the dim interior. What he saw made him freeze in absolute astonishment. A bobcat, clearly a nursing mother, lay in a nest of old hay surrounded by kittens. But these weren't all bobcat kittens. Tom's experienced eye could see the difference immediately. 4 of them were definitely wild, with the distinctive spotted coats and developing ear tufts of bobcats. But 5 others were domestic cats, regular barn cat kittens that had no business being with a wild bobcat mother. Luna watched him intently, her body tense and ready to defend her unusual family, but she didn't attack or flee. There was something in her eyes that Tom recognized, a mother's determination to protect her young at any cost. Tom backed away slowly and returned to his truck, his mind racing with the implications of what he had seen. He called the local wildlife rehabilitation center, speaking to the director, a woman named Dr. Sarah Chen, who specialized in wild feline care. Tom described what he had found, expecting skepticism, but Sarah's response surprised him. She had received reports of missing barn kittens from a farm 3 miles away, kittens that had disappeared during the storm. The owner had assumed they had been killed by the weather or predators. Sarah told Tom she would come immediately, but asked him to keep his distance and not disturb the family until she arrived. Dr. Chen arrived within an hour, accompanied by 2 assistants, and equipped with cameras and observation equipment. What they documented over the next several hours would become one of the most remarkable cases of cross-species maternal care ever recorded. Sarah watched through binoculars as Luna nursed her own kittens while allowing the domestic kittens to share her body heat and protection. She photographed the domestic kittens grooming the bobcat babies, observed the careful hierarchy Luna had established that ensured all 9 kittens received care while prioritizing her own offspring's needs. The decision about what to do required careful consideration. Separating the families too soon could cause distress to both Luna and the domestic kittens who had bonded with her. But leaving them together indefinitely presented challenges as the bobcat kittens grew and developed their wild instincts. Sarah decided on a gradual approach. They would monitor the family from a distance, ensuring Luna had access to adequate prey and that the domestic kitten's injuries continued to heal properly. When Luna's kittens were old enough to begin eating solid food and learning to hunt, that would be the time to intervene and find homes for the domestic kittens. Over the next month, the monitoring continued. Tom checked on the barn family daily, leaving fresh water in a bowl outside the entrance, and occasionally providing supplements when Luna's hunting seemed insufficient. The domestic kittens thrived under Luna's care, growing strong and healthy despite the unusual circumstances of their upbringing. The bobcat kittens developed normally, showing the natural behaviors and instincts that would serve them well when eventually released back into the wild. And Luna, the remarkable mother who had risked everything to save 5 kittens that weren't her own, continued to care for all 9 with equal devotion. When the time finally came for separation, it was bittersweet. The domestic kittens were carefully removed and placed in foster care where they would be socialized with humans before adoption. All 5 survived and found loving homes, their remarkable rescue story making them local celebrities. Luna's 4 Bobcat kittens remained with her for several more months, learning the skills they would need for survival. When they were finally old enough for independence, Sarah's team monitored their successful transition to wild living across the Colorado prairie. Luna herself returned to her territory, a survivor who had defied every expectation and every instinct of self-preservation to save lives that nature would have let perish. Trail cameras occasionally captured her image over the following years, always healthy, always thriving, proof that sometimes the wildest of hearts can contain the gentlest of compassion. And on the fence line where barbed wire had once held 5 small lives in its deadly grip, Tom Martinez placed a small marker, a simple reminder that heroism comes in many forms, and that the bonds of maternal love can transcend species, circumstance, and even the cruel mathematics of survival in the wild.